Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Yeah, I know I stand between you and lunch, so I'll keep this as light and interesting as possible. So the thought was, when I was asked to talk here, what I thought I'll do was share what I call the 4x4 perspective, which is really, from a marketeer's point of view, what are some of the things that one would look for, especially from the business, and also a little bit on the how of it, right, which is all about leadership. And this is not true just for marketing, but it will be true for many other functions as well. So what I'll do is over the next 20 minutes, just works. Yeah, perfect. So I'll talk about the role really, which is the what of what needs to be done by a marketeer, and then really look at some of the behaviors which are in the form of the hows. Yeah. So the first one, if I look at what is the role that marketing plays in any organization, and specifically in the context of an FMCG organization, clearly the biggest role that the function plays is how does it drive growth for the organization, right? So the chief strategist for the company is really the marketing person. What does that mean? It means in terms of how do you set the growth agenda for the organization. Therefore, what is the area to play in? What's the portfolio you need to have? What's your playground? And so on and so forth. There is a big point around having a holistic business perspective, right? So in terms of not just being aware of the marketing aspect, but having a much more well-rounded, holistic perspective, which is very important. Third part around strategic thinking, because that's really where the play comes in terms of what are the opportunities to go after, where do you have a right to succeed, and so on and so forth. So that again becomes very, very important. And the last point I put here is something called Phoenix Encounter. How many of you here read Harry Potter or read Harry Potter? Okay. So you must be aware there is this phoenix bird, right? And the thing about it is its ability to rise from the ashes. Yeah. So here, I came across this very interesting thing called Phoenix Encounter, which is really to say, how do you sort of make your business even stronger? So what they recommend there is, and this is true for all leaders to sort of do it for our own organization, is to completely find out what are the various things that can happen, which can burn down your organization, right? So what are the threats that you see for the organization? And the threat could come from anywhere. For example, if you're working for a bank, the threat could come from the fact that mobile penetration is now getting into 5G area, right? So that could have a direct bearing on how people transact, and therefore, do they even need a bank to come to, right? So it could be very, very wide, and the wider you go, the better it is, right? So this encounter, the way it works is, you burn down your company by finding ways of threats that exist for you, and then see how you build back the company by taking into account all possible, defense mechanisms that you can have. So I at least found this very interesting, and we have done this for our organization in terms of saying what are the possible threats and what are the possible defense mechanisms by which you can address some of those threats, right? And again, marketing plays a very big role here. You can call it in different names. There is, war gaming that you do, where you mimic what potentially competition can do and so on and so forth. But this methodology sort of goes a little beyond that to say, how can you address and strengthen your company further? The second part of it really, which is the core for any marketeer, is to be the voice of the consumer. Here it is not about just understanding trends, but even anticipating trends. Now I work for Perfetti, and if you go and ask a consumer, do you want a lollipop with a chewing gum inside it, right? The consumer will say yes. But if you were to go and ask them, what are you looking for in a lollipop? Very few of them would be able to come back and give you an answer that, yeah, I would like a lollipop with a chewing gum inside it, right? So the point is in this category, what consumers are looking for is constant innovation, constant delight. And in a way, it is about anticipating trends and saying that, look, how about putting a gum inside a lollipop so that as they go through the product experience, they have something else to delight them. So it is really having that one step ahead of consumers to be able to anticipate their needs rather than just understanding the needs. Yeah. I think the other point is about asking the right questions. And here really it is about how do you peel the onion till you come to the right insight. Now you have data, you have information, and then there is insight, right? And I'm sure all of you understand insight. So, a great way to do it is, for example, when I was working on Kurkure, we used to want to understand how does, tea time of a consumer look like? And what is the role that Kurkure can play in that tea time? And one of the things we used to do was go and sit in consumers' homes, of course, behind the scene, and observe them at tea time in terms of what do they do. And that gave us a very good insight on how is tea time, what do they do at the tea time, what do they eat, and what kind of a role can a brand like Kurkure play in the tea time, right? So really getting to insights will help us to come with the right kind of communication for our brands. And of course, one very important thing there is you might get insights, you might have the various different data points. How do I connect the dots and make sense out of that so that we can take the brand in a particular direction? And really, if I were to sum it up, it's about saying experience plus the knowledge that you have really leads to wisdom. And that wisdom is what stands a marketeer in good stead. So that's the second point, which is really about being the voice of the consumer. And if I look at it, the another one, which is very important, is how do I proactively benchmark? It's always good to say, oh, I'm doing well and the company is doing well, the brands are doing well, which is great. But then are we also keeping our eyes and ears open for what's happening around us? And there a couple of points are, what are the key metrics that you want to track? Now, if I look at any brand, there are two aspects to the brand, right? There is a business aspect. So am I tracking well on top line? Am I tracking well on the profitability of the brand and so on? And then there is an equity aspect, which is how is my top of mind score? How is the penetration, frequency, and so on and so forth. So am I got the right kind of metrics? Am I tracking them well on a certain periodicity and so on? That becomes very, very critical. And then it is also important to benchmark ourselves, not just amongst our peers, but also against the best in class. So you might say, okay, I operate in this segment, therefore for me, this is the peer group which I'll benchmark. But sometimes you might want to go beyond that peer group so that you're able to actually benchmark with truly best in class. And one of the ways to also sort of enhance the scope and really get to benchmarking well, understanding what's happening, is by proactively plugging into the marketing community. So again, one of the things I encourage my marketing teams to do is to say, go for these kind of sessions where you get to meet marketeers from other industries, because there is so much learning that can be cross-pollinated between industries, right? It doesn't mean that if somebody is doing a great job in marketing in a bank, that cannot be relevant for FMCG. There is a lot to learn and cross-pollinate as well. So I think one of the things is to be able to shamelessly steal with pride. If there is something good that is being done in an industry, how can we pick that up and take it for our own relevant industry and category? The fourth aspect is really around technology, and I'm sure you must have heard a lot about it from various people, not just in today's sessions, but also in general. Predictive analysis. Gone are those days when we said, okay, we have a lot of data, let's now analyze them and see what we need to do. I think today we get data, for example, from our sales colleagues, which almost does a prediction of saying, when you go for that next order booking with the shopkeeper, what kind of order is he likely to give, right? That's predictive analysis, right? The other piece is, of course, we have AR, VR, now we're moving to Meta. So, for example, recently on a brand like Alpenliebe, we partnered with a television channel to actually conduct their awards ceremony on a Meta, right? And there the awards were given out, the kids could play games there, and the whole thing happened in the Meta, right? So I think there is a parallel universe that's getting created even as we speak. I think we're all taking baby steps to understand that, but marketeers would do well to sort of get really deeper into it so that we can see how we can leverage that to provide deeper, more meaningful experiences to consumers. Of course, optimizing social media is a very, very important thing because it's a little bit of a huge, deep ocean. How do we make sure that we are able to navigate that well and leverage that well so that we get the benefits that we would like to get out of it? And I think that becomes very, very important. And last but not the least, one of the things I would encourage CMOs to look at is how do you weed out repetitive, non-value adding work? What are the work that can be outsourced so that the people in the team are doing something which is adding value to the organization and as well as to themselves, right? So that again becomes very, very, very critical. So these were the four things that I wanted to share from a perspective of, the what in terms of the role that marketeers can play in the organization. What I'll do is in the next 10 minutes or so, spend a little bit of time on some of the hows that I picked up. And like I said, these hows are not just for marketeers, but they go for any leader. But in this context, definitely relevant for marketeers as well. Again, many of you would have heard about this, nothing new there. But I truly believe one of the biggest differentiators between a great leader and a good leader, and therefore also a great marketeer and a good marketeer, is the ability to have a growth mindset, right? So what is growth mindset? Growth mindset really says, how can I do it? So implicit in that question is the fact that, yes, it can be done, right? Versus a fixed mindset is, oh, can it be done? Now, if you ask a question, can it be done? There is a 50% chance of, yes, it can be done, but there is equally a chance of, no, it can't be done, right? So really having a growth mindset actually allows us to explore possibilities and work collaboratively with teams to see how we can make it happen. And I think this is something that is true not just for our professional lives, but it's true actually for anything that we do. Very often when we come to a situation where we would like to do something and it is outside our comfort zone, the first question that comes is, oh, can I do this, right? And if you ask yourself, can I do this? Obviously there is an answer which says, no, you can't do it. Versus if I say, how can I do it, right? That puts a very different spin to the question. And therefore, that's the point about having a growth mindset. Again, nothing new in this term. All of us have heard about this. We live in an increasingly complex world, which is volatile, ambiguous, uncertain, complex, and so on and so forth. But I recently came across a couple of more Ds to this one. And one of them is disruption. So as a marketeer, what am I doing to disrupt things around me, right? As a brand, what am I doing to disrupt things around me? I think that's a question that all of us need to ask ourselves on a very, frequent basis. And the other one is diversity, right? Now, diversity is not just about gender diversity. We often talk about it. That's very important. But I think here it's about diversity in perspectives. So am I having a team which has people from different cultures, different ethnicity, different backgrounds, definitely different, both genders, so that we are able to make sure that we get perspectives from different people, and that really makes the quality of decision making much, much better, right? So in order to navigate through a VUCA world where there is disruption, which embraces diversity, I believe one of the very critical things is situational agility, right? So we all heard of situational adaptability, which is, there is a situation, how do I adapt myself? I think what situational agility does is, it adds an element of speed to the whole thing. So there is a situation, how agile can I be to quickly adapt myself to that situation, right? So that's all about situational agility. I came across this concept recently in a program that I attended, and I believe it's a very, very interesting and a very practical and useful concept, right? Which is really about altitudes of leadership. So if you look at it, ideally we should be operating at 3 levels. One is a 50,000 feet level where we have a clarity on the big picture, what is happening from a macro perspective, and so on and so forth. Then there is a 50 feet level, which is all about operational excellence. Am I able to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, and get the work done? And then there is a 5 feet level, which is all about myself. Am I spending enough time on myself? Am I developing myself as a better professional, as a better person, and so on, right? So the question to ask is, am I spending enough time at all 3 levels? Am I able to seamlessly toggle between one level and the other, right? And what is the thing is that if you spend too much time in one level, it's altitude sickness. So I'm sure you have, you know of bosses who, for example, spend a lot of time on the big picture and have no clue about what's happening in the ground level, right? Or alternately, there are bosses who get so much caught into the operational nitty-gritties that they forget the big picture. So if you stay too long at one level, it's altitude sickness. But the point is, how am I able to seamlessly toggle between the various levels? And one way to check that is to do a periodic self-audit in terms of, oh, okay, in the last week, did I spend enough time between the 3 levels? And one of the more important levels is also, am I spending time on myself to make sure that I develop myself as a better professional and a person as well? And the fourth point I wanted to make on this aspect is, I've come across a very simple three-step leadership model, which I believe works extremely well because of its simplicity. And the three steps are really about setting the agenda, taking others with you, and doing it the right way, right? Now, setting agenda is something that is all about visioning. How do you, sort of create a burning platform and so on and so forth. This is something that you can still do, even if you can't do it yourself, you can hire consultants to do it. That's what BCG and McKinsey do for a living, right? So it's about setting the agenda. The other part is around taking others with you, which is, am I being collaborative? Am I being authentic in my leadership? And am I able to get a team to rally around my vision and take the people along with me? And of course, doing it the right way is about having the right systems and processes, the right values and ethics. And if I would ask you the question of the three, which is the most important? What would you say? Sorry? Yeah, between these three, the middle one. Okay, any other answers? Setting the agenda. Okay, so to me, the most important of the three is taking others with you, right? Because like I said, setting the agenda, you can do it. Worst case, you can outsource it. Doing it the right way, of course, the belief is that we all come with a certain set of values and beliefs, and we can have the right systems, processes, governance to do things. But what distinguishes one leader from the other is their ability to take the team along with them to achieve the results that they want to achieve, right? So that's a very, very key aspect of leadership. And therefore, in summary, if I were to look at it, there were two things I wanted to talk about. Some of the whats in terms of what is expected from CMOs, we spoke about that. And then there are some of the hows, which is in terms of the behavior that we need to exhibit or demonstrate in terms of growth mindset, situational agility, taking others with you, and so on and so forth. I just leave a last thought, and I'm happy to take questions after that. This is one of the things that I sort of truly believe in, which is that, ultimately, if you have to be leaders who are nurturing leaders, right, where we are nurturing not only ourselves, but also our teams, some of the important things to take care are, how are we managing our own energies in terms of physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy, and spiritual energy, right? Are we doing enough things for ourselves to manage that? And if you are able to manage that well, then we are able to manage our teams also well, right? So maybe one of the things that we should periodically take stock is, in order to manage my physical energies, what am I doing? Am I having a good routine in terms of fitness regime? Am I being mindful of what I put into my body, and so on and so forth? Similarly, for emotional energy, do I have a passion that I feel strongly about and I pursue, which really helps me to also unwind and declutter my mind and therefore be at energy equilibrium? Now, these are things sometimes we don't talk about, right? Because when you talk about marketing, then we talk about, okay, brand and communication and strategy and so on. Very important to do that. But also equally important is to keep some of these aspects in mind to say, am I being a truly nurturing leader who makes sure that I nurture myself and thereby nurture my teams around me as well, and actually also the ecosystem around me, because that's the only way we can get ourselves to sort of work at our full potential. Yeah. So those are a few things that I wanted to share. I wanted to keep it short also, just to make sure that I speak about a few points and hopefully those points stick with you. But I think we have about 8-10 minutes. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take that. And of course, otherwise, I guess next is lunch. We can still hear you, so it's okay.
Point that I wanted to kind of understand from you. A CMO is caught between his daily routine and, the office and the meetings and a whole lot of things, How does a CM get out of that bubble of his own, and get the insights that are outside that bubble? Isn't that a challenge also for a CMO of today's times?
Absolutely. And, it's a very valid point, because I think the time and energy is finite today, right? So then ultimately it's about making choices in terms of where you spend that time and energy, right? So, again, there is no, prescribed solution to it, but some of the things to keep in mind is, do I have a team where I'm able to effectively delegate? Ideally, each of us at different levels should be performing at one level above us and not one level below us, right? So if I had a good team underneath me, then I can make sure that I effectively delegate and they are able to do their job so that, and in fact, they are even able to do part of my job so that I can spend time on doing stuff which is, say, slightly above what I'm supposed to do. And then that becomes a virtuous cycle, right? So one very important thing is, am I able to effectively delegate to my team? The second aspect to it is prioritization, right? Ultimately, life and work, everything is about making choices. So if I have X number of things to do, I have to make some choices to say, this has to be done, this has to give way. And that's a choice that we make on a daily basis, weekly basis, etc. Right? So that's where the strategic clarity is very important, followed up with operational excellence, where we are able to make those choices and then go after those choices ruthlessly. Like, for example, one of the things that we say is less is more, right? So how do I take on a few big bets, really go after them ruthlessly and make them count, rather than do too many things and then the focus of the team, of the self, everything sort of gets then dispersed. I hope that answers your question.
That's it.
Anybody else?
Okay, at the
Okay.
liberty of taking, okay, somebody else asking the question? Yeah?
No.
Okay, I have one more question, which is, within the corridors of a company, the CMO's role is becoming more powerful by the day, Where would that role, how much of clout would that role have maybe 5 years down the line? Will he be the most powerful man in the company?
So again, I'm not sure about this corridors of power thing. I can't comment on that. But let's put it this way. I believe that, like I said in the beginning, CMO plays a very critical role in terms of shaping the strategy for the company, right? And if you look at historical trends, at least in the FMCG industry, and I can't comment on the other industries, usually you find the maximum number of general managers, managing directors coming from CMOs, right? And there is a reason for it, which is what I talked about right at the beginning, because they sort of shape the strategy. They have a far more holistic perspective to the business. And in a way, they are the external facing member of the management committee, if you will, right? So from that perspective, they tend to choose themselves a little ahead of some of the other functions. But I don't know about the most powerful, least powerful. I don't want to comment on that because I think that's a bit of a personality-driven thing and so on and so forth. But yeah, if you ask me, as a career progression, who has the greatest chance of sort of becoming a general manager or a managing director, I think it's from the bunch of CMOs. That's not to say that sales guys haven't become general managers or CFOs haven't become GMs. But at least in FMCG industry, I think the greater salience comes from CMOs. Yeah. Yeah.
When you say that if you ask a consumer whether they want a chewing gum in a lollipop, they might give a yes, they might give a no. But even at that time, how do you think we should consider a customer's opinion of what exactly when you ask them a question, because they might think that they might like it, but when the actual product comes in, they might not appreciate that thing. And
Correct.
even if you're looking at a sample size, that sample size might not extrapolate to the entire market size. So when we look at products like Pulse, I don't think so. Like they actually went out and they asked like whether you want it or not. So how much importance do you put on customer feedback and then expectations of what exactly product should be, especially when you're looking into your category of products?
Right. I think it's a great question. Like I showed in one of the charts, I think it's experience plus knowledge is wisdom. Right? So you have X number of years of experience, you have knowledge about the category, you put both together to have the wisdom to say, oh, if I've developed this product, is it going to really work? So there is a gut which comes into play, right? Number one. But ultimately, obviously it has to be liked by the consumers. And a product that you put in your mouth is something which is very subjective. Like it's not like a car, right? A car, it's still easy to figure out that broadly X number of people like it and therefore it will work. Whereas if I were to do a sampling of a product in this room, the reactions and the responses can be very, very diverse, right? So ultimately, we have to do the checks with the consumers. So it's always a balance between what the consumer has to say and what does your gut say. And I think that's where, if you are a seasoned marketeer, you're able to get a bit more nuances in terms of the gut reaction, which you say, yes, I think this will make it work. But to your point, I personally think Pulse is one of the great examples of success in this category, which has been fairly unprecedented, right? I think they had some in-house, know-how of the, the kind of experience. They combined it with their brilliant distribution network and so on and so forth to get a product which is done really well. But I think those are few and far in between. But the larger point, I think, is ultimately the thing has to be based on a balance between consumer research and understanding and what your gut says.
If we have time, the large FMCG that we see in India, like ITCs of the world and all, you have the category for snacking, for leisure consumption, or all of these category that we're talking, Alpenliebe and all. The amount of effort that it takes to conceptualize, find a gap and launch a product versus the Slurp Farms and, Whole Truth and the kind of D2C brands that find that gap. Like there are brands for sauces and, the disruption they are doing. Do you think the size is the reason that limits you to kind of disrupt with the new ideas or find what a consumer is wanting compared to when we go to the shelf today, the traditional options available from large giants FMCG versus what younger brands are offering and the way it is getting accepted? There's a huge gap that has been missed out by them.
Yeah. Again, good question. But I think, again, it's about a balance, right? So if you look at it, I mean, even though I'm saying it myself, we've been in this country for 28 years. And if you see almost all the products and brands that we launch, we don't launch it unless there is something about it which is first to market, right? Something about it which is innovative. So for example, we were the first ones to launch a liquid-filled chewing gum, or first one to launch a jelly which is made with a technology which allows you to play with the product, or the first ones to launch a lollipop with a chewing gum inside it, and so on and so forth, right? So I think in certain categories, consumers expect variety, expect innovation, and so on. So what we pride ourselves with is we are a large company, but the point on situational agility, but we are also a nimble-footed company where we are able to quickly develop something and put it into market, right? Whereas to your point, some of these smaller companies it's very easy to do because, say, it's a small company, owner-driven, there is a great idea, they all go after it and they get it into market. Where they struggle with is scale, right? They can do it in Gurgaon, but if they have to do it across, we are available today in 5 million outlets. That's a staggering number, 50 lakh outlets. They'll probably be there in 5,000 outlets, right? So they struggle on the scale. So obviously, ultimately it's a balance. But what makes it work is if companies like us are able to leverage our innovative ability and yet be quick to the market, that's where the magic happens. All right, I think I'm getting some dirty looks, so time's up. Thank you very much, and pleasure speaking to all of you. Thank you.